So in my previous video, I spoke about typology systems that insist that an individual only has use of 4 functions rather than 8. Now, one way of understanding this paradigm is what you see here. So there's only 4 functions: thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, and then introvert and extrovert are merely attitudes of said 4 core functions. These are the functions, and then these are the attitudes that they can manifest as. So in this paradigm, if you were to ask the question, okay, which processes have the most in common with each other? Well, if you were to look at, for example, introverted thinking, well, what has the most in common with it? Well, by this paradigm, it would be extroverted thinking, because they're both thinking. They both belong to the thinking function. If you look down here, what would have the most in common with NI? Well, it would be NE, because they both belong to the intuition function. They are merely subtypes of the intuition function. Same with the other ones. What has the most in common with FE? Well, it would be FI, because they're both just subtypes of the feeling function. They're merely attitudes of the core feeling function. So that's one way to split up the pie as far as these 4 function theories go. But there is another way. This one was introduced by Cognitive Type, and it starts with the what's known as the energetic foundation. So going over the energetic foundation presented to us by Cognitive Type, where this comes from is the 2 primary Jungian dichotomies, one being rational versus irrational, and the other being extroverted versus introverted. Rational and irrational, also known as judging or perceiving, hence the J and P. So if you were to ask the question in this paradigm, what, for example, has the most in common with introverted thinking? Well, the answer would not be extroverted thinking. Instead, if you were to ask what has the most in common with introverted thinking, the answer would be introverted feeling, because they are both introverted judging. That's the core process. TI and FI are just subtypes of introverted judging under this paradigm. Another example, if you were to ask what has the most in common with extroverted sensing, well, it would not be introverted sensing. Instead, the answer would be extroverted intuition, because they are both extroverted perception. They are merely subtypes of extroverted perception. This is the core. Another example, what has the most in common with extroverted feeling in this paradigm? Well, it would not be introverted feeling. Instead, the correct answer would be what has the most in common with extroverted feeling would be extroverted thinking, because they're both extroverted judging. They're both subtypes. They are merely subtypes of extroverted judging. That's the core. These are the 4 core processes. So you can see how the core in this paradigm is quite different than the core in this paradigm. A system that has quite a similar structure to Cognitive Type is actually objective personality. They start from the same energetic foundation, although their semantics are slightly different. So instead of calling it JI, they would call it DIs for introverted deciding. Instead of calling it PE, they would call it OE for extroverted observing. It's just a semantic bullshit difference, but it's the same fundamental structure. But yeah, just 2 different ways of slicing up the pie as far as these 4 function models go. Very interesting stuff. You have systems like Axis 12 that actually utilize both of these. I'm not sure which one they're more committed to. I mean, historically, it would seem they're more maybe committed to this, because that's the Cognitive Type influence coming through. And obviously, when they break down their foundation, they definitely start with those 2 primary Jungian dichotomies of rational, irrational, and extrovert versus introvert. So this approach may be Axis 12's home base, but they also seem to play with this a bit. But yeah, regardless, 2 different ways of slicing up the pie. Very interesting stuff.